Yeah, I want to address a few things. I know there's been a lot of discourse, a lot of anxiety, and quite frankly, a lot of anger. And I think the anger is well warranted. It's merited anger. It's justified anger. One of the things that often perplexes me is that this is not new. This is not a new narrative relative to the view, the perception, and quite frankly, the reality of what it is to be a black man in America. Our history over 400 years ago was riddled with this kind of violence, this kind of inhumanity, this kind of disrespect from our travel across the Middle Passage to the separation of our families, the raping of our women, and the raping of our men, the emasculation of our men, in slavery, through civil rights, through all of the horrors and the days of segregation and everything that sought to break us, that continues to seek to break us. So this is not a new reality. For us, I think the new generation of technology, which, if you want to be quite candid, is not really new. We saw the advent of what video footage has done over the course of time when it was acceptable, when we saw blacks being water hosed and being brutalized and being attacked by police dogs, being confronted with police preventing us from entering into schoolhouse doors, and in some cases having to be escorted by the U.S. military in those areas that continue to decry, deny, and declare that segregation will continue to live in its public schools when the national government said it should end. So again, our denials, our challenges, our struggles are not new. But even still, 1992-93, Rodney King, video footage almost over 30 years ago, we saw the brutality that was placed on a black man with bats by white officers when he was almost hanging on with an inch of his life. And 30 years later, on the heels of that video footage and that emancipation, that vindication of those officers, despite the video footage, these things continue to happen. As a black man in America, as a black man coming out of the Liberty City community, which many people call the ghetto, this for me is not a new narrative. Every black man in some shape, form, or fashion has seen this story through our personal lens, which we call our eyes, which we call our lives. I think America, once again, and that's when I say that with a degree of sarcasm, once again, gets a chance to see it once again. They've seen it over the past several weeks with Ahmaud in Georgia, being shot like a dog by white men who videotaped it as if it were a sport, which they were basically hunting a black man who would, I guess in their eyes, would be running like an animal in the wilderness, and they were basically on the hunt on the back of a truck. And somebody was filming the attack, somebody was filming the kill of a black man, and weeks later we have one of the most horrific scenes that I've seen in my life. And I've seen some things. I have seen some things. I have seen some things. But that represents one of the most horrific things that I've ever seen in my life, in which a 17-year-old black female captured what reflects incidents that quite frankly have transpired time and time again. And unlike those snapshots in time that capture a 5, 10, 15, 20, 30-second clip of an attack on a black man by those in charge, predicated on racism, predicated on hate, predicated on division. Those snapshots in time that we've lamented over, that we gasp about, those seconds, those clips. This horrific scene represented nearly 10 minutes in which people watched other law enforcement officers protected the murder of a brother by a white police officer who has a history of snuffing out the lives of those who represent the minority community, those who are different. And it appeared that he seemed to gloat, that he seemed to enjoy it over the course of the nearly 10-minute clip. When the brother's neck was under his knee, and the life oozed out of his body, when his cries for mercy, when his cries for relief, when his cries and his request for water to quench his thirst, when his conceding that his life was leaving him, and his appeal for his mother, in the words "mama, mama," his life oozed out of his body. And that was captured in one of the most horrific scenes that I've ever seen in my life. But quite frankly, a scene that has happened to black people, and more specifically black men, for over 400 years in this country that we didn't ask to come to, but upon our backs was built. And I know those would counter this whole notion of black on black crime and where's the outcry, where's the outrage. Yes, we have black on black crime, and there's white on white crime, and there's Hispanic on Hispanic crime. People proclaim to have conflicts and are involved in crimes against the people in close proximity within the communities they live. It's not an anomaly when a black kills a black, just as much as not an anomaly when a white kills a white, or a Hispanic kills a Hispanic. But there's a special type of terror. There's a special type of pernicious pain that comes with one who predicates the taking of another's life, the devaluing of another's life, based on historical hate, heartfelt hate, historical hate that was predicated on the color of a person's skin. And that narrative continues to play out. And once again, that narrative has been captured. And now that narrative has resulted in the explosion, the implosion of the frustration of blacks, of Latinos, of whites, of everyone who stands up, speaks out, and fights against racial injustice. So this narrative that we have lived with and continue to live with is clearly part of a silly, cynical, and systemic system of racism. This system and this process of degradation, denial, and in many cases death often manifests itself in places like our schools, where we look at the disparities that occur in terms of academic progression, where there's a higher percentage of black boys that retain in grade 3, although they don't represent the majority of those students in that particular population, but they represent the highest percentage. And we understand that retention is the sounding of the alarm, the ringing of the bell, the shooting of the gun in the race toward a journey that will lead to progress, positivity, and progression. But often for black boys, it's a journey that often results in prison, poverty, or an early death. The data are clear on the nuances and the negativity of retention, that it increases the likelihood that our black boys will drop out of school exponentially once they're retained. And that data are often reflected in the percentage of black boys that are in ESE courses based on the percentage of black boys that represent the overall student population. That data continues to rear its ugly head in the disparities in which black boys are arrested at an alarming rate and face accusatory measures based on school-wide discipline issues that end up in the criminal justice system when it should remain in the educational system. Once again, ringing the bell on the school-to-prison pipeline that often perplexes black boys. So this system of degradation, this system of division, this system of denial, and this system of disparity surprisingly shows up on the streets in our community, in residential areas in which Trayvon Martin got a bag of Skittles, wore a hoodie, and was murdered by George Zimmerman. This is not the first time that a black brother asked the police who were accosting him to give him relief because he couldn't breathe. It happened in New York as well. It happens in cities and communities across this country. We didn't know what happened. We didn't know what happened to many of our brothers and sisters in the days of civil rights, in the days of open lynching. We didn't know what happened to them because we didn't have the benefit of video footage. We saw what happened after the fact. We saw what happened after the fact. But every now and then we catch a glimpse of evil in action. And that's what we just saw. We saw evil in action. Racism epitomized. Hate manifested. And as Tupac said decades ago now, that he saw no changes. And right now we see none. We didn't see him when Emmett Till allegedly whistled at a white woman and he was murdered brutally to the extent that his mother deemed him unrecognizable, but courageously chose to give him an open casket so that the world could see. The world could see the ugliness, the hatred, the brutality of racism that was levied against her son. So it wasn't caught on a camera phone. It wasn't caught on a camcorder. It manifested itself in an open casket decision to let the world know the remnants of racism, the sour, bitter fruits of the seeds that were planted. By those who declared and decried that blacks were not full human beings and were not deserving of the full rights and respect of humanity. And this story continues. And the interesting thing about it is that it resonates with a small segment of people in this world. Very small but challenged. A very small but pursued. A very small but attacked. A very small but feared. A very small but often hated. A very small but often misunderstood. And that small percentage of humanity represents the black man. And nobody understands that narrative, nobody understands that story, nobody understands the journey, the walk of what it is to be a black man in America. You can't hide, you can't deny it, you can't fake it. You know, other ethnicities can hide whether or not they are Latino. You can be white, you can move in and out. We have to accept, embrace, and lean in and stand strong with respect to the skin we're in. We can't hide who we are. We can't hide from those who seek to discredit, divide, and destroy us. But 2 Corinthians says in the Word of God that yes, we are hunted down. We are hunted down. We are hunted down. We are prey. We are hunted down. And yes, to a great extent, we're hunted down in our own communities by each other. But yes, we are hunted down. But the mainstream hunt that has taken place over the past 400 years is one that has declared us prey. And several decades ago, declared us an endangered species, that we were at risk of not being able to survive. Forget thrive, to survive. We were declared an endangered species. There was literature and research on a conspiracy to destroy black boys, which is a conspiracy inherently to destroy black men, which inherently is a conspiracy to destroy the black family, which inherently is a conspiracy to destroy the black community, which inherently is a conspiracy, a plot and a plan to eradicate the presence and the power of black people in America. We are hunted down, but God never abandons us. And when things like this occur, we have the proclivity in society to engage in a nonsensical debate around negating and negotiating who's a racist. For me and for us not to get trapped in the episodic conundrum of accusatory positions of who's a racist, is an evident futility and, quite frankly, a damn waste of time. I think our charge, our collective charge, and it is one that cannot be squarely shouldered by black folk. But history has shown us that anytime we're going to be successful in moving the mark, moving the needle in terms of equality, equity, fairness, and dignity for humanity, especially for black people, is that in our efforts to be inclusive, in our inclination to be forgiving, we have to avoid some sense of naivety around who's a racist, but collectively invest our energy, our time, and our efforts in destroying a system of racism. The charge is not about an individual racist. The collective charge, the charge of black people, white people, Hispanic people, poor people, rich people, is to lean strongly into a collective resolve to acknowledge, recognize, and accept the existence, and most recently the proliferation of a system of racism against black people, and collectively organize to destroy it. We get knocked down, as we have for over 400 years, but we get back up. The black man gets back up. The black man gets back up. The black man gets back up and keeps on going.
We just wanna party, party just go. We just wanna party.